October 13th. The rain fell like bullets against the cracked asphalt of Highway 9, each droplet exploding into 1,000 fragments before being swept away by the relentless wind. Thunder rolled across the barren landscape of Millfield County, a forgotten corner of Nevada, where tumbleweeds gathered like conspirators in the shadows of abandoned gas stations and rusted road signs. At 11:47 p.m., the Wildrose Motel stood like a beacon of false hope against the storm, its neon sign flickering between no and vacancy in a dying rhythm that seemed to match the labored breathing of the desert itself. The motel was a relic from better times, when Highway 9 had been a main artery connecting the gambling halls of Reno to the oil fields of Texas. Now it served primarily as a way station for lost souls and desperate travelers who had nowhere else to turn. Inside room 23, Cassandra Cass Holloway pressed her face against the rain-streaked window, watching the storm tear apart the October night. At 22, she possessed the kind of ethereal beauty that belonged in old Hollywood films. Auburn hair that caught light like spun copper, green eyes that held depths of both vulnerability and fierce determination, and a smile that could make strangers believe in magic again. But tonight, that smile was nowhere to be found. "The car's not going to start in this weather," she whispered, more to herself than to the man sitting on the edge of the bed behind her. "We should have kept driving when we had the chance." Marcus Webb looked up from the crumpled map, spread across his knees, his dark eyes reflecting the intermittent glow of the neon sign. At 24, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to navigate life's treacherous waters alone. His hands, calloused from years of construction work, traced the red highways that snaked across the paper like arteries on a body. The engine was overheating, Cass. Another 10 miles and we would have been stranded in the middle of nowhere, as opposed to being stranded here. She turned from the window, gesturing at the faded wallpaper and stained carpet that spoke of countless temporary residents who had passed through this room like ghosts. At least out there, nobody would find us. The weight of her words hung in the air between them. They both knew what she meant. They both knew who might be looking. Marcus folded the map carefully, his movements deliberate and controlled. "We will leave at first light. The storm will pass, and we will have a clear shot to the California border. By tomorrow night we will be in San Francisco, and this will all be behind us." Cass wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that they could simply drive away from the nightmare that had been pursuing them for the past 3 weeks. But as lightning illuminated the empty parking lot outside, she caught a glimpse of something that made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. A black sedan sat at the far edge of the lot, barely visible in the shadows cast by a broken streetlight. She hadn't noticed it when they'd checked in 2 hours earlier. The car seemed to absorb the darkness around it, as if it were made of shadow itself. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. He was beside her in an instant, following her gaze to the sedan. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The car sat perfectly still, its windows too dark to reveal whether it was occupied. But something about its presence felt malevolent, predatory. "Could be anyone," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Lots of people get stuck in weather like this." They both knew it wasn't just anyone. The story had begun, like many tragedies, with love. Cass had been working the evening shift at Rosie's Diner in Carson City, balancing plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes while dreaming of something bigger than the endless parade of truckers and traveling salesmen who passed through the restaurant's smoke-stained doors. She had been saving every tip, every spare dollar, planning her escape to art school in California where she could finally pursue her passion for photography. Marcus had walked in on a Tuesday night in late September, soaked from an unexpected downpour, and looking like trouble in a worn leather jacket. But when he smiled at her, really smiled, not the leering grin she was used to from most of the men who frequented Rosie's, she felt something shift inside her chest, like a lock clicking open after years of being sealed shut. "Coffee?" she had asked, already reaching for the pot. "Coffee would be perfect," he had replied. And maybe some of whatever's making this place smell so good. That had been the beginning. Over the course of 2 weeks, Marcus had become a regular, always ordering the same booth in her section, always leaving generous tips, always treating her like she was more than just another waitress in a dead-end town. He told her about his work at the construction site outside town, about his plans to start his own contracting business someday, about the small apartment he rented above the hardware store on Main Street. What he didn't tell her, what she wouldn't discover until it was almost too late, was about the life he had been running from. The revelation had come on October 1st, delivered by a man in an expensive suit who had appeared at the construction site during Marcus's lunch break. Cass had been bringing him a surprise sandwich when she witnessed the confrontation from across the street, hidden behind a parked truck. The man in the suit had been tall and thin, with silver hair slicked back and eyes like chips of ice. When he spoke to Marcus, his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made grown men's hands shake. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the effect they had on Marcus, the way his shoulders tensed, the way his face went pale beneath his tan. "You thought you could just disappear, didn't you, Marcus?" The man's voice had finally carried across the street as the wind shifted. "You thought Vincent Torino would just forget about the money you took." Torino. Even in a backwater town like Carson City, that name carried weight. Vincent Torino was old-school organized crime, the kind of man who still believed in making examples of people who crossed him, the kind of man whose reach extended far beyond the neon boundaries of Las Vegas. "I didn't take anything that wasn't owed to me," Marcus had replied, but his voice sounded hollow, defeated. "That's not how Mr. Torino sees it. He's been very patient, Marcus. But patience has its limits." The man in the suit had left shortly after, climbing into a black sedan that purred away like a satisfied predator. Marcus had stood alone in the construction site for a long time after that, staring at nothing. That evening, when Cass had asked him about it, Marcus had finally told her the truth. He had been working construction in Las Vegas, legitimately at first, but the money had been tight and the bills had been piling up. When Vincent Torino's organization had offered him side work, moving packages, no questions asked, it had seemed like the answer to his problems. "I was stupid," he had told her, sitting in his small apartment as rain drummed against the windows. "I thought I could do a few jobs, make enough money to get ahead, and then get out clean. But there is no getting out clean with people like that." The final job had been different from the others. Instead of picking up a package, Marcus had been told to deliver an envelope to a rival organization, a message that would either secure peace or declare war. But when he had seen the contents of that envelope, when he had realized he was being used to deliver evidence that would destroy innocent lives, he had made a choice that would change everything. He had kept the envelope and run. What was in it? Cass had asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Photos, documents, evidence of things that could put a lot of people in prison or get them killed. Torino was planning to frame his rivals for something they didn't do, and I was supposed to be his delivery boy. "So you still have it? The envelope?" Marcus had nodded, gesturing toward a lockbox hidden beneath his floorboards. "Insurance, I guess. As long as I have it, Torino can't make his move. But he also can't let me live with that kind of leverage over him." That had been 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of running, of sleeping in different motels every night, of constantly looking over their shoulders. Cass had made the decision to run with him without hesitation, love making her brave in ways she had never thought possible. But now, sitting in the Wildrose Motel as a storm raged outside and a black sedan lurked in the shadows, she wondered if love would be enough to keep them alive. In the sedan, 2 men sat in silence, their eyes fixed on room 23. The larger of the two, a man named Dmitry Kozlov, cleaned his fingernails with a switchblade knife, the metal catching occasional flashes of lightning. His face bore the kind of scars that spoke of a violent profession, and his massive hands looked capable of crushing bone without effort. His partner, Anthony Weasel Marconi, was smaller but no less dangerous. Where Dimitri was direct force, Weasel was cunning and patience. He had the kind of narrow face that seemed designed for slipping through cracks and listening at keyholes. His reputation for finding people who didn't want to be found was legendary in certain circles. "Been 3 hours," Dimitri said, his accent carrying traces of his Eastern European origins. "Maybe we should move." "Patience," Weasel replied, never taking his eyes off the motel room. "Storm's got them trapped. They are not going anywhere, and rushing in now would be sloppy. Mr. Torino doesn't pay us to be sloppy." They had been tracking Marcus Webb for weeks, following a trail of credit card transactions and motel receipts across 3 states. The young couple had been clever, switching between cash and cards, never staying in one place for too long, always moving at unpredictable intervals. But everyone made mistakes eventually, and the mistake had been stopping at a gas station in Millfield County that afternoon. The attendant had remembered them. Hard not to remember a couple that beautiful, he had said. More importantly, he had seen which direction they had headed when they left. From there, it had been simple process of elimination. The Wildrose Motel was the only accommodation for 50 miles in any direction. "You think the girl knows?" Dimitri asked, sliding the knife back into his jacket. "About the envelope? Probably. About what we are going to do to them? Probably not." Weasel's smile was cold and predatory. "Won't matter much longer either way." Vincent Torino had been very specific about the terms of their assignment. The envelope was to be recovered at all costs. Marcus Webb was to be made an example of, the kind of example that would discourage others from thinking they could steal from the organization and live to spend their profits. As for the girl, well, she had made her choice when she decided to run with him. Lightning illuminated the motel again, and in that brief moment of clarity, Weasel saw movement in the window of room 23. A figure, the girl, pulling the curtains closed. "They know we are here," he said. Dimitri's hand moved instinctively to the gun beneath his jacket. "So what do we do?" Weasel considered their options. They could wait until dawn and take the couple when they tried to leave, but that would mean hours more of sitting in the car. They could call for backup, but Miss Torino had been clear that this was to be handled quietly, with minimal attention from local law enforcement. Or they could end it tonight. "Storm's good cover," Weasel said finally. "No other guests, clerks probably asleep in the office. We go in quiet, get what we came for, and be gone before anyone knows we were here." Dimitri nodded, checking his weapon one final time. "What about making it look accidental? Car crash. Tomorrow morning, Highway 9 claims 2 more victims. Happens all the time in weather like this." They sat in the sedan for a few more minutes, watching and waiting. The storm showed no signs of abating, and the motel remained dark except for the flickering neon sign and the faint glow from room. At 12:15 a.m., they made their move. Inside room 23, Cass and Marcus had spent the past hour preparing for what they both knew was coming. They had pushed the dresser against the door and turned off all the lights except for a small bedside lamp. Marcus had retrieved the envelope from his travel bag, the envelope that had started this whole nightmare, and held it like a talisman against the darkness. "We could give it to them," Cass whispered, though even as she said it, she knew it wouldn't matter. They had seen too much, knew too much. Vincent Torino didn't leave loose ends. "They will kill us either way," Marcus replied, confirming her fears. "At least this way, we have something to bargain with." The photographs in the envelope were damning. Images of a rival crime boss meeting with federal agents, documents that had been forged to make it appear as though he was cooperating with law enforcement. If released, they would start a war that would tear apart the criminal underworld of the Southwest. But they would also destroy an innocent man who had never betrayed anyone. "I should have just minded my own business," Marcus said, staring at the envelope. "Should have delivered it like I was told and collected my money. Then you wouldn't be the man I fell in love with." He looked at her, this beautiful woman who had chosen to share his fate rather than abandon him to it. "I'm sorry, Cass, for all of it. You deserved better than this." "I chose this," she replied firmly. "I chose you." A sound from outside made them both freeze. Footsteps on gravel, barely audible beneath the storm but unmistakably deliberate. Someone was approaching the room. Marcus moved to the window and carefully peered through a gap in the curtains. Two figures were crossing the parking lot, moving with the practiced stealth of predators. The larger one carried something in his hand, something that glinted metallically in the intermittent lightning. "They are coming," he whispered. Cass felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "The bathroom. There's a window." They had checked earlier. The bathroom window was small but large enough for them to squeeze through. It faced the back of the motel, toward the desert that stretched endlessly into the darkness. If they could make it outside without being seen, they might have a chance. The footsteps stopped outside their door. Marcus grabbed Cass's hand, and they moved as silently as possible toward the bathroom. Behind them they heard the soft sound of someone testing the door handle. The dresser they had pushed against it would buy them precious seconds, but no more than that. In the bathroom, Marcus worked frantically to open the window, while Cass watched the door. The old frame was swollen with humidity and age, and it fought against his efforts like a living thing. A loud crash from the main room told them their time was up. The door had given way, and their pursuers were inside. "Bathroom," a voice called out. Cold, professional, speaking with barely contained violence. "Check the bathroom." The window finally yielded with a sound like breaking bones. Rain and wind howled through the opening, but it looked like freedom. Marcus boosted Cass up first, watching as she squeezed through the narrow frame and dropped into the desert night. Behind him, heavy footsteps approached the bathroom door. He was halfway through the window when the door exploded inward. The Nevada desert at night was a hellscape of sharp rocks and hidden ravines, made even more treacherous by the driving rain that turned sand to mud and obscured their vision to mere feet. Cass and Marcus ran hand in hand through the darkness, guided only by occasional flashes of lightning that revealed the alien landscape around them. Behind them, shouts and the beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the storm. Their pursuers had followed them through the window and were gaining ground with each passing minute. The hunters knew this terrain, had probably used it before to dispose of problems that needed to disappear into the vast emptiness of the American Southwest. There, Marcus gasped, pointing toward a cluster of boulders about 50 yards ahead. "We can hide, wait for them to pass." They changed direction, their feet sliding on the slick rock surface as they scrambled toward shelter. Cass felt her lungs burning with effort, her legs shaking from exhaustion and terror. But Marcus's hand in hers was warm and solid, an anchor in the chaos that surrounded them. The rocks formed a natural shelter, carved by millions of years of wind and rain into shapes that looked almost deliberate. They squeezed into a narrow crevice between two massive stones, pressing their backs against the cold granite and trying to control their ragged breathing. Lightning illuminated the desert again, and in that moment of stark clarity, they saw their pursuers less than 100 yards away. The larger man, the one with the scarred face, swept his flashlight in broad arcs while his partner studied the ground for tracks. "Footprints wash away fast in this rain," the smaller man called out, his voice carrying clearly through the storm. "But they can't have gone far. Desert will kill them for us if we don't find them first." "Mr. Torino wants the envelope," the larger man replied. "Doesn't matter if we find them dead or alive, as long as we get what we came for." Cass felt Marcus tense beside her. The envelope was still in his jacket pocket, sealed in a plastic bag to protect it from the rain. Whatever was in those photographs and documents was worth more than their lives to Vincent Torino, worth enough to send killers into a desert storm to retrieve it. The flashlight beam swept past their hiding place, missing them by inches. Cass held her breath, counting heartbeats that sounded like thunder in her ears. One of their pursuers was so close she could hear his labored breathing, could smell the cigarette smoke that clung to his clothes. "Check those rocks," the scarred man ordered. Footsteps approached their hiding place, slow and methodical. The beam of the flashlight grew brighter, probing into the shadows between the stones like a malevolent eye seeking them out. Marcus squeezed Cass's hand 3 times, their signal from weeks of running together. When he moved, she was to run in the opposite direction. If they split up, one of them might survive long enough to reach help. The footsteps were almost upon them when lightning struck nearby, a brilliant flash followed immediately by thunder that shook the very ground beneath their feet. In the chaos of that moment, Marcus burst from their hiding place and ran directly toward their pursuers, shouting to draw their attention. "Here, I'm here. Come and get me." Cass wanted to scream, wanted to run after him, but she forced herself to follow the plan. While their attackers focused on Marcus, she slipped out of the rocks and ran in the opposite direction, toward a ridge that might offer better cover. Behind her she heard shouting, the sound of a struggle, and then something that chilled her to the bone. Marcus's voice, raised in pain and fear. "The envelope's not here. I hid it. You will never find it without me." It was a lie, she knew, a desperate gambit to keep himself alive long enough for her to escape. But as she ran through the storm, tears mixing with rain on her face, she wondered if love and sacrifice would be enough to save either of them. The storm began to break just before dawn, the rain slowing to a steady drizzle. As the first pale light crept across the eastern horizon, Cass had spent the night huddled in a shallow cave she had found in the ridge, listening to the wind howl through the rocks and praying that Marcus was still alive. As visibility improved, she could see the Wildrose Motel in the distance, its neon sign dark now in the growing daylight. There was no sign of the black sedan, no indication that their pursuers were still searching the area. But there was also no sign of Marcus. She made her way carefully back toward the motel, staying low and using the scattered boulders for cover. Her clothes were soaked through, her hands cut and bleeding from scrambling over sharp rocks in the darkness. But she was alive, and as long as she remained alive, there was still hope. The motel seemed abandoned in the morning light, its parking lot empty except for their battered Chevrolet. The door to room 23 hung open, swaying slightly in the desert breeze. She approached it cautiously, every instinct screaming at her to run, to keep running until she was far away from this place and its memories. What she had to know: the room had been destroyed, furniture overturned, mattresses slashed, drawers pulled out, and their contents scattered across the floor. Someone had searched the place thoroughly, looking for something they hadn't found, looking for the envelope. On the bathroom floor, she found drops of blood leading to the window they had escaped through. Not much blood, but enough to tell her that Marcus had been hurt during the struggle. Whether he was still alive was a question she couldn't answer. But as she stood in the ruins of their temporary sanctuary, Cass made a decision that would change everything. She would not run anymore. She would not spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, wondering when Vincent Torino's people would finally catch up with her. She would fight back. The envelope Marcus had died protecting, or might still be dying to protect, contained evidence of corruption and murder. Evidence that could bring down one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the Southwest. If she could get it to the right people, if she could make sure the truth came to light, then Marcus's sacrifice would mean something. But first, she had to survive long enough to make that happen. She gathered what few belongings hadn't been destroyed in the search and walked out to their car. The keys were still hidden under the rear bumper, where Marcus had placed them the night before. The engine turned over on the second try, coughing and sputtering but running. As she drove away from the Wildrose Motel, Cass looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The building was already fading into the desert haze, becoming part of the landscape of abandoned dreams and forgotten tragedies that dotted the American West. But this tragedy would not be forgotten. Not if she had anything to say about it. 39 years later, FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen stood in the evidence room of the Millfield County Sheriff's Department, examining items that had been collecting dust since the Wildrose Motel case had been officially closed as a missing persons investigation with no leads. But new technology and a fresh perspective had breathed life into old mysteries. The construction crew found it yesterday, Sheriff Bob Martinez explained, holding up a metal lockbox that had been unearthed during the demolition of the motel. Buried about 6 feet down, right under what used to be room. Agent Chen opened the box carefully, revealing its contents to daylight for the first time in nearly 4 decades. Inside was a manila envelope, its contents preserved by the dry desert air and the airtight seal of the lockbox. Cassandra Holloway, she read from a handwritten notepaper clipped to the envelope. If you are reading this, then I didn't make it out alive. But the truth needs to survive. Even if I don't, use this to bring them down. Use this to make it matter. Marcus Webb, October 3rd. The photographs were grainy but clear enough to identify faces that Agent Chen recognized from organized crime files. The documents bore letterheads from shell companies and legitimate businesses, creating a paper trail that connected Vincent Torino's organization to murder, extortion, and corruption at the highest levels. Evidence that could have changed everything if it had been found in time. Any word on what happened to the couple? Agent Chen asked. Sheriff Martinez shook his head. Never found bodies, never found the car. Could be anywhere out there in the desert. But after 39 years, he didn't need to finish the sentence. As Agent Chen prepared to transport the evidence back to the FBI field office in Las Vegas, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than a simple case of lovers on the run. The careful burial of the evidence, the detailed note from Marcus Webb, the fact that their bodies had never been found despite extensive searches, it all suggested a level of planning and foresight that went beyond desperate people making desperate choices. But those were questions for another day. Right now, she had enough evidence to reopen investigations into dozens of unsolved murders and disappearances connected to the Torino organization. Evidence that 2 young people had died to preserve. Their love story had ended in tragedy, but their legacy would live on in the justice that evidence would bring. Or so Agent Chen believed as she loaded the lockbox into her vehicle and began the drive back to Las Vegas. She had no way of knowing that in a small town in Northern California, a woman named Catherine Webb ran an art gallery and photography studio under her married name, displaying pictures of Nevada desert landscapes that captured both beauty and melancholy in equal measure. She had no way of knowing that sometimes, in the early morning hours when the gallery was empty and quiet, that woman would stand before a particular photograph, a storm-swept vista of the Wildrose Motel, taken from a distant ridge, and whisper a prayer for the man who had taught her that love sometimes means knowing when to run and when to fight. The past, Agent Chen would learn, had a way of keeping its secrets, even when the evidence said otherwise. Special Agent Sarah Chen spread the contents of the lockbox across her desk like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that had been waiting nearly 4 decades to be solved. The fluorescent lights of the FBI field office cast harsh shadows across the faded photographs and yellowed documents, making the faces in the images look like specters from another era. Vincent Torino's organization had been dismantled piece by piece over the years, some members dead, others in federal prison, the rest scattered to the winds of witness protection or exile. But the man himself had died of natural causes in 1997, taking his secrets with him to a grave in a Las Vegas cemetery where flowers still appeared mysteriously every October. Interesting coincidence, Agent Chen murmured, noting the date on Marcus Webb's letter. October 13th, 1984. The same date flowers appeared on Torino's grave every year. She made a note to look into that particular detail. Her partner, Agent Michael Rodriguez, looked up from his own examination of the evidence. What's interesting? Someone's been visiting Vincent Torino's grave every year on the anniversary of the Wildrose incident. Could be family, could be old associates paying respects, could be someone with a very personal reason to remember that date. Rodriguez finished. You thinking one of them survived? Chen pulled up the original missing persons report on her computer. The file was thin. Rural Nevada in 1984 didn't have the resources for extensive investigations, especially when the missing persons appeared to be criminals on the run. But there were details that had been overlooked, threads that no one had thought to pull. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a section of the report. Their car was found abandoned 20 miles east of the motel, keys still in the ignition. But here's what's strange. There were no fingerprints on the steering wheel or door handles. Someone wiped it clean. Professional job, Rodriguez agreed. Torino's people would have known to clean up after themselves. But why abandon the car at all? If you are disposing of bodies in the desert, you don't leave evidence sitting on a highway for the state police to find. Chen pulled up a map on her computer, marking the locations of the motel and the abandoned car. Unless what? Unless you want people to think you are dead. The possibility hung in the air between them like smoke. If Cassandra Holloway and Marcus Webb had somehow escaped that night, if they had managed to outwit both their pursuers and the authorities, then they could be anywhere. They could be anyone. "I will run their names through the system again," Rodriguez said. "Cross-reference with any aliases they might have used. Social security numbers, credit histories. If they survived and tried to build new lives, there has to be a paper trail somewhere." Chen nodded, but her attention was drawn back to the photographs from the lockbox. One image in particular caught her eye. A shot of what appeared to be a meeting between Vincent Torino and a man she didn't recognize. The stranger was tall and thin with silver hair, wearing an expensive suit that screamed federal government. "Mike, take a look at this," she said, handing him the photograph. "Any idea who the suit is?" Rodriguez studied the image carefully, his expression growing troubled. "That's Deputy Director Harold Vance, Internal Affairs Division. Or at least, that's who he was. He died in a car accident in 1987. Single vehicle crash on a mountain road outside Denver. Very suspicious circumstances. But the investigation was shut down from above." Rodriguez set the photograph down carefully. "If Torino was meeting with someone that high up in the bureau, this goes deeper than we thought." The implications were staggering. If a deputy director of the FBI had been compromised by organized crime, then the envelope Marcus Webb had died protecting contained evidence of corruption at the highest levels of law enforcement. Evidence that could have brought down not just Torino's organization, but federal agents who were supposed to be investigating them. "We need to be very careful about who we share this with," Chen said quietly. "If there are still people in the system who were connected to this, people who thought these secrets were buried forever, they won't hesitate to bury us too," Rodriguez finished. Chen made a decision that would change the trajectory of their investigation. Instead of following normal protocols and reporting their findings up the chain of command, she would pursue the case independently until she was certain who could be trusted. "I'm going to take a personal day," she announced. "There's someone I need to talk to." The Ocean Breeze Gallery sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, its windows offering spectacular views of waves crashing against jagged rocks below. The building itself was modest, weathered cedar shingles and large windows that let in the Northern California light, but the photographs displayed inside were anything but ordinary. The current exhibition was titled Desert Storms, a study in light and shadow, featuring black and white landscape photography that captured the stark beauty and hidden menace of the American Southwest. Each image seemed to tell a story of isolation and survival, of beauty found in desolation. Catherine Webb moved through the gallery with practiced grace, adjusting the lighting on a particularly striking photograph of storm clouds gathering over distant mountains. At 61, she possessed the kind of ageless elegance that spoke of a life lived with purpose and intention. Her auburn hair had silver threads now, and laugh lines crinkled around eyes that had seen both joy and sorrow in equal measure. But it was those eyes that gave her away. Green as bottle glass, with depths that held secrets. A small brass placard beside the photograph read, Storm warning, Nevada desert, 1984. Silver gelatin print by C. Webb. The bell above the gallery door chimed softly as Agent Chen entered, her FBI credentials discreetly displayed. She had driven up from San Francisco that morning, following a hunch that had formed while studying the evidence from the lockbox. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. A photographer named C. Webb, displaying images of the Nevada desert from 1984, living under a name that could easily be a variation of Cassandra Webb. Mrs. Webb, Chen approached the woman carefully, noting how she tensed at the sight of the federal badge. "I'm Special Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about some photographs." Catherine's hands stilled on the frame she had been adjusting. "What kind of question?" "Questions about the Wildrose Motel, about a night in October." The color drained from Catherine's face, but she maintained her composure with the skill of someone who had been practicing deception for nearly 4 decades. "I'm afraid I don't know what you are talking about, Agent Chen." "Please," Chen said gently. "I'm not here to arrest you, Mrs. Webb, or should I say, Ms. Holloway. I'm here because I think you are the only person who knows the truth about what happened that night, and I think that truth might be the key to solving more than just your disappearance." For a long moment the two women stood in silence, surrounded by images of the desert that had once been home to so much violence and fear. Finally, Catherine walked to the gallery's front door and turned the sign to close. "There's coffee in the back," she said quietly. "I think this conversation is going to take a while." "You have to understand," Catherine said, pouring coffee from an old percolator in the gallery's back office. "We were just kids. Scared kids who thought love could conquer anything, even Vincent Torino." Agent Chen accepted the coffee gratefully, noting the tremor in Catherine's hands as she set down the pot. Even after all these years, the memories still had the power to shake her. "Tell me what really happened that night." Catherine settled into a chair across from her, cradling her own cup like a lifeline to the present. "Everything in that police report was true, up to a point. Marcus and I were at the motel. We saw Torino's men in the parking lot. We tried to escape through the bathroom window. But what happened after that?" She paused, staring out the window at the Pacific Ocean. "Marcus didn't sacrifice himself to save me. We both made it to those rocks in the desert. We hid there together while those animals searched for us, and when the storm finally drove them back to their car, we thought we were safe. But you weren't." "No. They came back at dawn with more men, dogs, helicopters. Torino wasn't taking any chances. We could hear them getting closer, and we knew it was only a matter of time before they found us." Catherine's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "That's when Marcus told me about the insurance policy. The lockbox. He'd buried it 2 days earlier, when we first arrived in Millfield County. Said if anything happened to us, at least the evidence would survive. But there was something else in that box, Agent Chen. Something the FBI didn't find." Chen leaned forward, sensing they were approaching the heart of the mystery. "What else?" "Instructions. A contact name. Someone Marcus had been working with before he decided to run." Catherine met Chen's eyes directly. "Your predecessor knew about the envelope, Agent Chen. The FBI was already investigating Torino's organization, and Marcus was supposed to be their inside source." The revelation hit Chen like a physical blow. If Marcus Webb had been working with the FBI, then his disappearance wasn't just a missing persons case. It was the loss of a federal informant, and that meant someone in the Bureau had known exactly what happened to him and Cassandra, and had chosen to let the world believe they were dead. "Who was the contact?" Chen asked. "Deputy Director Harold Vance." The name sent a chill down Chen's spine. The same Harold Vance who had died in a suspicious car accident in 1987. The same man who appeared in photographs with Vincent Torino. "Vance was dirty," Chen said, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. "Worse than dirty. He was playing both sides, taking money from Torino while pretending to investigate him. Marcus stumbled onto the arrangement when he saw them meeting, And that's when he decided to steal the envelope. He thought he could expose the corruption and bring down both Torino and Vance. But Vance got to him first. Catherine shook her head. Vance saved us. I know how it sounds, Catherine continued, seeing the confusion on Agent Chen's face. But you have to understand the position Vance was in. He'd been taking Torino's money for years, feeding him information about federal investigation. But when he realized Torino was planning to use forged evidence to destroy innocent people, he couldn't go through with it. So he helped you escape? He was the one who told Marcus to bury the lockbox. Said if anything happened, the evidence would be insurance for both of us. And when Torino's men closed in that morning, Vance was there with them. Chen tried to process this new information. He was working with the killers. He was directing them. Told them he'd found our bodies in a ravine, that we'd fallen during the storm and died on impact. Showed them blood on the rocks. Our blood because we'd both been cut up pretty badly scrambling through the desert. But he'd staged the scene to make it look like an accident. And they believed him? Torino trusted Vance completely. Why wouldn't he? Vance had been on his payroll for 5 years. So when the deputy director of the FBI told him we were dead, that our bodies had been destroyed by scavengers and weather, Torino accepted it as fact. The audacity of the deception was breathtaking. Vance had saved their lives by convincing their would-be killers that they were already dead. But there had to be more to the story. What happened after that? Chen asked. Vance got us out of Nevada in the trunk of his car, drove us to a safe house in Colorado, gave us new identities, new social security numbers, enough money to start over somewhere far away from Torino's reach. In exchange for what? Catherine's smile was bitter. Our silence. Forever. We could never contact our families, never use our real names, never speak about what we'd seen or what we knew. As far as the world was concerned, Cassandra Holloway and Marcus Webb had died in the Nevada desert on October 3rd, and you accepted those terms? We were 22 and 24 years old, Agent Chen. We just watched professional killers hunt us through a storm. The choice was simple. Disappear forever, or die for real. But Chen sensed there was still more to the story. Where's Marcus now? The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Catherine set down her coffee cup and walked to the window, staring out at the ocean as if it held answers to questions she'd been carrying for decades. Marcus died in 1987, she said finally. Cancer, aggressive, fast-moving. He was gone within 6 months of the diagnosis. I'm sorry. The irony wasn't lost on us. We'd survived Vincent Torino, corrupt federal agents, a desert storm, and professional killers. But we couldn't survive something as ordinary as disease. Catherine turned back to face Chen. I scattered his ashes here, from these cliffs. It seemed appropriate. He always said the ocean was the one thing that made him feel truly free. Chen felt a stab of sympathy for this woman who had lost everything. Her identity, her family, and ultimately the man she'd sacrificed everything to save. But there were still questions that needed answers. Why didn't you come forward after Torino died? After Vance died? You could have reclaimed your life. What life? Catherine's laugh was hollow. My parents had held a funeral for me in 1985. My friends had moved on. The world had forgotten Cassandra Holloway ever existed. And besides, there were others involved. People who were still alive, still dangerous. Vance had told us the corruption went deeper than just him. And Torino. What others? I don't know names. Vance was careful about that. But he said there were federal judges, prosecutors, other agents, people who would do anything to keep their secrets buried. Catherine met Chen's eyes. People who might still be in positions of power today. The warning was clear. Even now, nearly 40 years later, the truth about the Wildrose Motel incident could destroy careers and lives. But it could also bring justice to families who had never known what happened to their loved ones. The flowers on Torino's grave. Chen said suddenly, October 13th every year. That's Catherine nodded. Not out of respect, out of defiance. Every year, I make sure that bastard knows I'm still alive, still remembering what he tried to do to us. It's the only revenge I have ever been able to take. As if summoned by their conversation about ongoing threats, Agent Chen's phone buzzed with an urgent text from her partner Rodriguez. Get out of there now. Your location has been compromised. Trust no one. Chen's blood turned to ice water. She had told no one except Rodriguez about her trip to Mendocino. If someone else knew where she was, it meant they were being watched by people with access to federal resources. We need to leave, she told Catherine urgently. Right now. What's wrong? Someone knows I'm here. Someone who shouldn't. Chen was already moving toward the gallery's back exit, her hand instinctively moving to the weapon beneath her jacket. Is there another way out of here? Catherine moved with surprising speed for a woman in her 60s, grabbing a go-bag from behind her desk that suggested she had been preparing for this moment for years. There's a trail down to the beach. If we can make it to the water. They never got the chance to find out. The gallery's front windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and wooden frame fragments. Two men in dark tactical gear burst through the opening, weapons drawn, moving with military precision. Federal agents, one of them shouted. Nobody move. But Chen could see immediately that these men weren't FBI. Their gear was too new, too expensive, and their weapons bore no federal markings. More importantly, real federal agents would have identified themselves properly and given clear commands. These were contractors, private military. Back door, Chen hissed to Catherine, drawing her own weapon. They crashed through the gallery's rear exit, just as more armed figures appeared at the front of the building. Catherine led the way down a narrow trail that switched back through coastal scrub toward the beach below. Behind them, heavy footsteps and shouted commands indicated their pursuers were following. Who are they? Catherine gasped as they half ran, half slid down the steep path. People who don't want the truth to come out, Chen replied. People who have been keeping secrets for 40 years and will kill to protect them. The beach was a narrow strip of sand and rocks at the base of towering cliffs. Waves crashed against tide pools, sending spray high into the air. It was beautiful and isolated and potentially a trap if their pursuers controlled the only way back up. There, Catherine pointed to a sea cave partially hidden by fallen rocks. We can hide there until help arrives. But Chen wasn't sure help was coming. Her phone had no signal, and she was beginning to suspect that this operation was being run by people with access to federal communication systems. People who could intercept calls, track locations, and deploy military contractors without official oversight. People who might still be working within the system. As they splashed through ankle-deep water toward the cave, Chen made a decision that would determine whether the truth about the Wildrose Motel would finally see daylight, or be buried forever along with everyone who knew it. She would not run. She would not hide. She would fight. Chapter 12. Revelation. Inside the sea cave, with the sound of waves echoing off wet stone walls, Catherine revealed the final piece of the puzzle that had been hidden for 39 years. There's something else you need to know, she said, checking her waterproof go-bag for the items she had been carrying for decades. Something I never told anyone, not even Marcus. She pulled out a small digital camera, its memory card containing hundreds of photographs. I never stopped documenting. Even after we disappeared, even after Marcus died, I kept taking pictures. But not just landscapes, Agent Chen. Evidence. Chen looked at the camera's display screen as Catherine scrolled through images. What she saw made her understand why professional killers had just tried to storm an art gallery in a peaceful coastal town. You have been investigating them, Chen said. All these years, you have been tracking down the people who were connected to the conspiracy. Federal judges who took bribes to throw cases, prosecutors who buried evidence, FBI agents who fed information to organized crime. Catherine's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly, as she scrolled through photograph after photograph of surveillance images, document copies, and clandestine meetings. Vance told me the corruption went deep, but I never realized how deep until I started looking. This is why they want you dead. Not because of what happened in 1984, but because of what you have learned since then. Some of these people are still alive, Agent Chen, still in power. And they know that if this evidence ever comes to light, it won't just destroy their reputations, it will put them in federal prison for the rest of their lives. The sound of rappelling equipment from the cliff above told them their pursuers had found another way down. They had perhaps minutes before the cave would be overrun. "Give me the camera," Chen said. "What?" "Give me the camera and get out of here. There's got to be another way out of this cave. These coastal formations usually connect to other openings." Chen checked her weapon and spare magazines. "I will hold them off while you escape. I'm not leaving you to die for my secrets. They are not just your secrets anymore. They are evidence in a federal investigation, and I swore an oath to protect that evidence, no matter what the cost." Catherine stared at her for a long moment, then pressed the camera into Chen's hands. "There's a memory card sewn into the lining of the bag. Backup copies of everything. And Agent Chen, there's something else you need to know about Harold Vance." "What?" "He didn't die in a car accident. He was murdered. I have photographs of the crime scene, taken by a private investigator I hired. Someone staged it to look like an accident, but it was an execution. The implications were staggering. If Vance had been murdered to silence him, then the conspiracy was even more deadly than Chen had imagined. And if the same people were still in power today—" "Go," Chen said firmly. "Find another way out and get those photographs to someone you trust. Someone outside the system." Catherine hesitated for a moment longer, then pressed something else into Chen's hand. A small brass key. "Storage unit 24/7. Mendocino self-storage. Everything's there. 40 years of evidence, Agent Chen. Don't let it die with us." She melted into the shadows at the back of the cave just as the first tactical team member rappelled into view outside the cave entrance. Agent Sarah Chen took a deep breath, checked her weapon one final time, and prepared to make her own stand against the forces that had been protecting deadly secrets for nearly 4 decades. The truth about the Wildrose Motel was finally going to see the light of day, no matter who had to die to make it happen. The first tactical operative to enter the sea cave moved with the fluid precision of someone who had done this countless times before. His night vision equipment swept the interior methodically, searching for heat signatures among the wet rocks and tide pools. Agent Sarah Chen pressed herself deeper into a crevice between 2 massive boulders, controlling her breathing and waiting for the right moment. She had perhaps 30 seconds before the rest of the team followed their point man inside. 30 seconds to even the odds, or die trying. The operative moved past her hiding spot, his attention focused on the deeper recesses of the cave where Catherine had disappeared. Chen rose silently from her concealment, her service weapon trained on the back of his tactical vest, where she knew the armor plates wouldn't protect him. "Federal agent," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. "Drop your weapon." The man froze, but Chen could see his muscles tensing for action. These weren't ordinary mercenaries. They were trained professionals, probably former military or intelligence operatives. They wouldn't surrender easily. "I said drop it," Chen repeated, moving closer. Instead of complying, the operative spun toward her with inhuman speed, his rifle swinging in a deadly arc. Chen fired twice. Center mass, the reports echoing through the cave like thunder. The man staggered but didn't fall. Body armor had absorbed most of the impact. But the noise had achieved Chen's real objective. It had announced to the world that federal law enforcement was present and under attack. The cave entrance suddenly blazed with tactical lights as the rest of the team prepared to storm inside. But Chen was already moving, using the maze of rocks and pools to her advantage, making every shot count as she fought a running battle through the cavern. "Chen, a voice called from outside the cave. "Agent Chen, this is Deputy Director Morrison, FBI. Stand down immediately." Morrison. Chen felt her blood turn to ice. She recognized that name from Catherine's photographs. Deputy Director James Morrison, who had been a junior agent in 1984 but had risen steadily through the ranks over the past 4 decades. Morrison, who had somehow managed to be present at every major decision point in cases involving organized crime, corruption. Morrison, who had apparently survived and thrived while men like Harold Vance had died in suspicious accidents. "You are going to want to surrender, Agent Chen." Morrison's voice echoed into the cave. "You are outgunned, outnumbered, and completely out of your depth. This doesn't have to end with your death." Chen pressed herself against the cave wall, counting muzzle flashes and calculating distances. She had perhaps 6 rounds left in her primary magazine, plus 2 spare clips. Against a tactical team with superior equipment and training, it wouldn't be enough. But it might be enough to buy Catherine time to escape with the evidence. "Tell me something, Morrison," Chen called back. "How long have you been cleaning up after the Torino organization? Since 1984, or did you start earlier than that?" Silence from outside the cave. Then Morrison's voice, colder now. "You have no idea what you are dealing with, Agent Chen. What you have stumbled into. This goes far beyond Vincent Torino or some missing persons case from 40 years ago." "Then, educate me," Chen replied, using the conversation to mask her movement deeper into the cave. "Tell me about the federal judges on organized crime payrolls. Tell me about the prosecutors who buried evidence. Tell me about Harold Vance." "Vance was a fool who forgot which side he was on," Morrison snapped. "He thought he could play both sides forever, but when he started developing a conscience, he became a liability." So Catherine had been right. Vance had been murdered. And what about Cassandra Holloway and Marcus Webb? Were they liabilities too? "They should have stayed dead," Morrison said. "Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble." Chen realized with growing horror that Morrison wasn't just cleaning up an old case. He was eliminating witnesses to a conspiracy that was still ongoing, still active, still profitable for people in positions of power. "Last chance, Chen," Morrison called. "Walk out of that cave with your hands up and we can discuss a transfer to a nice quiet field office somewhere. Keep fighting, and you will join Webb and Holloway in whatever unmarked grave we dig for you." Chen's response was 2 precisely aimed shots that shattered the tactical lights outside the cave entrance, plunging the area into darkness. The war for the truth had begun. While bullets flew in the sea cave above, Catherine Webb moved through a narrow passage that connected to a network of sea caves carved into the Mendocino coastline by millions of years of Pacific storms. She had discovered these passages years ago during her solitary walks along the beach, never imagining she would one day use them to escape from professional killers. The sounds of gunfire echoed through the rock, each shot making her flinch as she wondered whether Agent Chen was still alive. The young FBI agent had risked everything to protect evidence that could finally bring justice to victims who had been waiting nearly 4 decades for the truth. Catherine emerged from the cave system onto a rocky beach half a mile south of her gallery. Her waterproof bag contained backup copies of everything: photographs, documents, recorded conversations, financial records, evidence that connected current federal officials to decades of organized crime corruption. But evidence was only valuable if it reached the right people. And after 40 years of watching corrupt officials protect each other, Catherine wasn't sure who the right people were anymore. Her phone miraculously showed 2 bars of signal. She scrolled through her contacts, looking for someone she could trust with information that would destroy careers and possibly topple entire government departments. The name she settled on was Dr. Elizabeth Warren, not the senator, but an investigative journalist who had spent her career exposing government corruption. Catherine had been feeding her information anonymously for years, always careful to maintain her own cover. But tonight, cover didn't matter anymore. "Dr. Warren," Catherine said when the call connected. This is going to sound insane, but I need you to listen very carefully. My name is Cassandra Holloway, and I have been dead for 39 years. As dawn broke over the Mendocino coastline, the tactical operation at the Sea Cave had evolved into a complex standoff. Agent Chen had managed to hold her position for over 2 hours, using the cave's natural fortifications to neutralize several attackers, while avoiding the increasingly desperate attempts to flush her out with grenades and smoke. But her ammunition was running low, and she could hear Morrison coordinating with additional units that were arriving by helicopter. Whatever this conspiracy was, it had access to serious resources. Agent Chen, Morrison called from his command position. "I'm going to make you an offer, one time only." "I'm listening," Chen replied, using the conversation to reload her final magazine. "You are a good agent. Clean record, commendations, bright future ahead of you. Walk away from this, and you can keep that future. Report that you found no credible evidence in the Wildrose case, close the file, and transfer to whatever field office you prefer. And if I refuse, then you die in that cave, and the official report will show that you were killed by foreign terrorists who had been using the area as a smuggling route. Very tragic, very heroic. Your family will get a nice flag." Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean spray. The casual way Morrison discussed manufacturing her death told her everything she needed to know about the scope and ruthlessness of this conspiracy. "You know what I don't understand, Morrison?" Chen said. "Why keep this going after all these years? Torino's dead. Vance is dead. Most of the original players are gone. Why not just let sleeping dogs lie?" Morrison's laugh was bitter. "Because some sleeping dogs have very sharp teeth. Agent Chen, the Torino organization was just the beginning. Over the past 40 years, we have built something much bigger, much more sophisticated, a network that spans federal law enforcement, the judiciary, and organized crime. We provide protection, they provide funding. Everyone wins, except for the victims. There are always casualties in any war, Agent Chen. The question is whether you are going to be one of them." But Chen had heard enough. Morrison's casual admission of ongoing corruption was being recorded by her phone, which was transmitting everything to a backup server she had established before leaving Las Vegas. Even if she died in this cave, the evidence would survive. "Tell me something, Morrison," she said. "How does it feel to know that everything you have built is about to come crashing down?" "What are you talking about?" "Cassandra Holloway isn't the only survivor from 1984, and she isn't the only one who's been gathering evidence." Chen smiled grimly in the darkness. "You are not fighting a missing persons case anymore, Morrison. You are fighting a federal RICO investigation that's been building for months. It was a bluff, but it was based on enough truth to be believable." Chen had noticed inconsistencies in several organized crime cases over the past year, patterns that suggested information was being leaked to criminal organizations. She had been quietly documenting these anomalies, never realizing they were connected to the Wildrose case. The silence from outside the cave told her the bluff had hit its mark. The sound of additional helicopters approaching from the north initially filled Chen with dread. More tactical units arriving to finish the job. But the radio chatter she could hear from Morrison's position had a different tone now. Urgent. Worried. "Sir, we have FBI helicopters approaching from multiple directions. They are demanding we identify ourselves and stand down." "Impossible," Morrison's voice carried clearly in the morning air. "I control all federal operations in this region. Sir, they are broadcasting federal warrants for your arrest. They are calling this Operation Wildrose." Chen felt a surge of hope. Somehow, Catherine had managed to get the evidence to people who could act on it. But Morrison wasn't finished yet. "All units, fall back to extraction point Bravo," Morrison ordered. "Eliminate the target in the cave and prepare for emergency evacuation." The tactical team's final assault came with desperate fury. Grenades bounced off cave walls, filling the air with shrapnel and choking smoke. Automatic weapons fired chewed up rocks and sent deadly fragments ricocheting through the cavern. Chen pressed herself into the deepest crevice she could find, returning fire when she could, but mostly just trying to survive the onslaught. Her ears were ringing from the explosions, and she could feel blood running down her face from a dozen small cuts. But she was still alive when the FBI tactical teams breached the cave from both ends, their distinctive blue windbreakers a welcome sight in the smoke-filled cavern. Agent Chen. The team leader's voice was professional but concerned. Agent Chen, identify yourself. Here, Chen called weakly, emerging from her hiding place with her hands visible. Agent Sarah Chen, Las Vegas field office. The rescue team moved with efficient precision, checking her for injuries while their colleagues secured the cave system. But Chen's first question wasn't about her wounds. Morrison, she said. Did you get Morrison? The team leader's expression was grim. Deputy Director Morrison's helicopter went down over the Pacific about 20 minutes ago. Mechanical failure, according to preliminary reports. No survivors. Chen felt a mixture of satisfaction and frustration. Morrison was dead, but so were the answers he might have provided about the full scope of the conspiracy. What about the woman? Catherine Webb? Safe and in protective custody. She's the one who triggered Operation Wildrose when she contacted Dr. Elizabeth Warren with evidence of federal corruption. Dr. Warren immediately called the director's office, and within 2 hours we had warrants for a dozen current and former federal officials. As Chen was helped out of the cave and into the morning sunlight, she realized that the nightmare that had begun in a Nevada motel room 39 years ago was finally coming to an end. But the full scope of what they had uncovered was only beginning to be understood. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in San Francisco was the scene of the largest organized crime corruption trial in U.S. history. The evidence Catherine Webb had gathered over 4 decades formed the backbone of indictments against 47 current and former federal officials, 23 federal judges, and over 200 organized crime figures. Agent Sarah Chen sat in the gallery, her left arm still in a sling from the cave confrontation, watching as witness after witness detailed the intricate web of corruption that had protected organized crime for generations. The scope was breathtaking: casino licenses bought with federal protection, murder investigations buried by corrupt prosecutors, evidence destroyed by FBI agents on criminal payrolls. At the center of it all sat Catherine Webb, no longer hiding the identity of a dead woman. At 61, she possessed the quiet dignity of someone who had finally seen justice served after a lifetime of waiting. Mrs. Holloway, the federal prosecutor said, using Catherine's legal name for the first time in decades, can you tell the court what motivated you to spend 39 years gathering evidence against these defendants? Catherine looked directly at the defense table, where former federal officials sat in orange jumpsuits alongside mob bosses and corrupt judges. Love, she said simply. I loved a man who died trying to expose this corruption. I loved the idea that America was supposed to be better than this. And I loved the victims who never got justice because these people put profit over duty. The prosecutor nodded. And what would you say to those who argue that this conspiracy was a thing of the past? That these crimes happened decades ago? I would show them this, Catherine replied, gesturing to a display screen that showed financial records from the previous year. Money transfers, witness intimidation, evidence tampering, all of it happening as recently as last month. This wasn't history, Your Honor. This was an ongoing criminal enterprise that treated the federal justice system like their personal protection racket. In the weeks that followed, verdict after verdict came back guilty. Former Deputy Director Morrison's network was dismantled piece by piece, with sentences ranging from 25 years to life in federal prison. But the most satisfying moment for Chen came during the sentencing of Vincent Torino Jr., who had inherited his father's organization and continued its corrupt relationship with federal officials. Your Honor, Torino's lawyer argued, my client was born into this life. He had no choice but to continue his father's business relationships. The judge, one of the few federal officials whose integrity had never been questioned, looked at Torino with obvious disgust. "Mr. Torino, your father's organization spent decades corrupting the very system that was supposed to protect American citizens from people like you. Your network turned federal agents into criminals, judges into accomplices, and prosecutors into co-conspirators. The sentence of this court is life in federal prison without the possibility of parole." As Torino was led away in shackles, Chen felt a hand on her shoulder. Catherine Webb stood beside her, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus would have been proud," Catherine said softly. "He would have been proud of you," Chen replied. "You finished what he started." 1 year after the trials ended, Agent Sarah Chen stood on the same Mendocino bluff where the final confrontation had taken place. The Ocean Breeze Gallery had been rebuilt, its windows once again offering spectacular views of the Pacific. But the photography exhibition inside was different now. Justice Delayed, a photographic record of corruption and courage, featured not just Catherine's landscape work but the surveillance photographs, document copies, and investigative images she had gathered over 4 decades. Each picture told part of the story of ordinary citizens fighting against a system that had been corrupted from within. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a simple black and white photograph of the Wildrose Motel, taken from the ridge where Catherine had hidden during that terrible night in night. The image captured both the starkness of the desert and the humanity of the small motel where 2 young people had made a stand against forces much larger than themselves. Catherine, now using her real name again, moved through the gallery with the same grace Chen remembered from their first meeting. But there was something different about her now, a lightness that came from no longer carrying the weight of secrets. "Any regrets?" Chen asked as they stood before the motel photograph. "About what? Giving up 40 years of your life? Living as someone else? Never being able to contact your family?" Catherine considered the question carefully. "My parents died thinking I was dead. My sister still thinks I'm dead. She's in her 70s now, and I have decided not to disrupt her life with revelations about the past. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people keep their memories intact. That must be difficult." "It is, but I have learned that family isn't just about blood, Agent Chen. It's about the people who stand with you when everything falls apart. Marcus was my family. You became my family when you risked your life to protect evidence that could have died with us." Chen felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the California sunshine streaming through the gallery windows. Over the past year, as they had worked together to prepare testimony and evidence for the trials, she and Catherine had developed the kind of friendship that was forged in shared danger and mutual respect. "What's next for you?" Chen asked. "I'm going to keep taking pictures," Catherine replied. "But maybe some happier subjects. Maybe some images that show what America looks like when justice actually works." Through the gallery windows they could see the Pacific stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, the wreckage of Morrison's helicopter rested on the ocean floor, alongside the secrets of men who had thought they were above the law. But the truth had a way of surviving, even when everything else was swept away by storms. On October 13th, 2024, exactly 40 years after the night that changed everything, Agent Sarah Chen made a pilgrimage to a cemetery in Las Vegas. She carried 2 bouquets of flowers, one for Vincent Torino's grave, and one for a newer headstone that had been placed in the cemetery's memorial garden. The new marker was simple granite, engraved with words that told the story of a man who had died too young but had not died in Marcus Jonathan Webb, 1960–1987. He chose truth over safety, love over fear. Chen placed the flowers carefully, then stepped back to read the inscription one more time. Catherine had chosen the words herself, finally able to give the man she loved a proper memorial after decades of hiding. At Torino's grave nearby, the annual flowers had appeared again, but this time they were accompanied by a small American flag and a handwritten note. "Justice served. Rest in pieces. Catherine's final act of defiance had a humor to it that Marcus would have appreciated. As Chen prepared to leave the cemetery, her phone buzzed with a text message from Catherine. "Documentary crew wants to interview us next week about the case." "Interested?" Chen smiled and typed back. "Only if we can do it at the gallery. I think Marcus and Harold Vance would like the view." The Wildrose Motel case had become a teaching tool at the FBI Academy, a cautionary tale about corruption and an inspiring story about courage. Young agents learned how institutional rot could spread when good people stayed silent, and how the actions of ordinary citizens could topple seemingly invincible criminal enterprises. But for Chen, the case would always be more personal than that. It was about two young people who had chosen love over safety, truth over convenience, and justice over survival. It was about a woman who had spent 40 years of her life gathering evidence so that other victims might find peace. Most of all, it was about the idea that some things were worth fighting for, no matter how long the fight took or how high the cost. The HBO documentary Desert Storm, The Wildrose Motel Conspiracy premiered 2 years later to critical acclaim and record viewership. The film used Catherine's photographs and FBI evidence to tell the complete story of how a single night in 1984 had exposed decades of federal corruption. But the documentary's most powerful moment came during Catherine's final interview, conducted at sunset on the Mendocino Bluffs, where she had found peace after decades of running. "People ask me if I'm angry about the 40 years I lost," she said, looking directly into the camera. "But I don't see them as lost years. I see them as years spent in service to something larger than myself. Marcus and we planted seeds that night in the desert. It just took 4 decades for them to grow into something that could bring down the people who thought they were untouchable." The interviewer pressed, "Do you think justice was truly served?" Catherine smiled, and for a moment the camera caught a glimpse of the young woman who had fallen in love in a Carson City diner so many years ago. "Justice is never fully served," she said. "It's an ongoing process, like the ocean wearing away at these cliffs. But every corrupt official who goes to prison, every victim who finally gets answers, every young FBI agent who learns that doing the right thing is more important than following orders, that's justice in action." "Any final thoughts?" Catherine looked out at the Pacific, where the sun was setting in a blaze of gold and crimson that would have made a beautiful photograph. "Marcus used to say that love was the only thing stronger than fear. I spent 40 years being afraid of discovery, afraid of death, afraid of what would happen if I failed. But in the end, love won. Love for Marcus, love for justice, love for the idea that America could be better than its worst impulses." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of 4 decades of hidden truth, finally brought to light. "The Wildrose Motel is gone now, torn down years ago to make room for a shopping center. But sometimes I think about that young couple who spent their last night together in room 23. And I'm grateful that their story didn't end in that desert. It ended in a courtroom where justice was finally served. And if you could speak to that young couple now, what would you tell them?" Catherine's smile was radiant with the kind of peace that comes from battles fought and won. "I'd tell them that love really is stronger than fear, that doing the right thing is worth any sacrifice, and that sometimes, if you fight long enough and hard enough, the good guys actually win." The documentary ended with aerial footage of the Nevada desert at sunset, the camera slowly pulling back to reveal the vast emptiness where the Wildrose Motel had once stood. But superimposed over the desert landscape were the faces of all the people whose lives had been touched by the courage of 2 young lovers who had refused to let evil triumph. Vincent Torino Jr., serving life in federal prison. Former federal officials, their careers and reputations destroyed. Families of murder victims, finally getting answers after decades of silence. Young FBI agents, inspired to choose integrity over convenience. The Wildrose Motel mystery had finally come to an end, but its legacy would live on in every person who chose truth over safety, love over fear, and justice over silence. In the end, that was the most fitting memorial Cassandra Holloway and Marcus Webb could have asked for. Agent Sarah Chen, now Deputy Director of the FBI's Organized Crime Division, keeps a framed photograph on her desk. It shows a young couple standing beside a battered Chevrolet at a gas station, their faces turned toward a future they couldn't possibly have imagined. The photograph was taken by a security camera on October 12, 1984, the last image of Cassandra Holloway and Marcus Webb before they disappeared into history and legend. Beneath the photograph is a small brass plaque with an inscription that serves as Chen's daily reminder of why she chose law enforcement as her career. They chose truth over safety, love over fear, and justice over silence. They chose to matter. On quiet afternoons when the weight of current cases threatens to overwhelm her, Chen looks at that photograph and remembers that sometimes the most ordinary people are capable of the most extraordinary courage. And somewhere on the California coast, an elderly woman tends her garden and takes photographs of the Pacific sunset, secure in the knowledge that love really is stronger than fear, that justice really can triumph over corruption, and that some stories, no matter how long they take to unfold, are worth waiting for.